Jamen, det kan jo være den frekvens, han kører på med kamera.
Yeah, okay. Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
Tak. Hallo.
Så kom der lyd. Ja, nu skal vi kortlægge Skandalens anatomi, og det skal vi med forfatteren Sarah Vaughan i samtale med Berit Holbæk Jensen.
Tak. And welcome, Sarah.
Thank you.
I asked if it was okay to introduce Sarah's novel in a maybe a bit exaggerated, but still we have to do with a novel about a serial rapist. Who doesn't know he is one? We don't have a lot of them. And now I'll introduce Sarah, and then we'll come back to what we mean about that. Sarah Vaughan, not to misunderstand with the other Sarah Vaughan, the jazz singer, I had to ask, but there's no relational things about. No, she was great too. Sarah is from England, Cambridge, and she's actually worked as a journalist for many years, as a news reporter and a political correspondent for The Guardian. But you've also, when you were young, you were studying English literature, I think, at Oxford University.
That's right.
And that is not unimportant to this novel. Yeah. You've published two novels before this one. They had not been translated to Danish yet, but that may come. But Anatomy of a Scandal is her first crime novel. And yeah. So now I think... No, one thing I'll just mention, that when people describe your novel, I've been reading about it, they say it's a Me Too marriage thriller, or it also been called domestic noir. So now I'm actually interested in hearing what you call it.
Okay, so Anatomy of a Scandal details what happens when a very charismatic government minister is accused of raping a parliamentary researcher with whom he's been having an affair.
Just a minute, can you hear her? God,
Yeah,
okay,
okay.
because I think, yeah.
Okay, with whom he's been having an affair. Oh, that's louder. In a lift in the House of Commons, so right in the heart of the British establishment. And it tells what happens when he's brought to trial, and also his relationship with his wife and how that's impacted. And it's one of the voices that tells the story is the female barrister who prosecutes him, who's convinced he's guilty. And also his wife, who's convinced he's innocent, and of course James, this minister, who's convinced he's innocent as well. Doesn't occur to him he's not. So it's been described as a Me Too marriage thriller because this relationship between James and Sophie, his wife, is very, very important. It's been described as a courtroom drama because the heart of the novel is this trial, this rape trial. But it's not just that, there's an aftermath as well. And I think it's a sort of psychological drama. It's an exploration of how our past comes to haunt us. Because there's a backstory 24 years before in Oxford, when James and Sophie are students. And again, that very much drew on my experience of being a student in a historic college, actually the college that our former Prime Minister David Cameron went to 6 years before me. So it's a combination of all those things. I don't really think it's domestic noir, because to me, that's quite a specific subset of psychological suspense. That's kind of quite claustrophobic, and it's set very much in the home. And this has got big settings. It's got big iconic settings. It's got Parliament. It's got Oxford. It's got the Old Bailey, which is the Maestro-Conic Court. So I'm trying to talk about entitlement and abuse of power and privilege and consent and bigger themes really than that.
Okay. Så lige et lille hurtigt resume, hvis der var, nu gik der lidt knas i det måske lige i starten. Altså vi har at gøre med denne her minister, junior minister i Indrigsministeriet, James, flot fyr, har kørt hele vejen fra Oxford, Eton, hvor det så er, Sarah også har gået en gang på Oxford, og der har David Cameron også gået, og nu sker der det, at James, som er lykkelig gift, ser det ud til med Sophie, som går derhjemme og sådan noget. Først kommer det frem, at han har haft en affære med sin sekretær. Det er ikke så godt. Men i virkeligheden, da han så slår op med sekretæren, så går der ikke ret lang tid, så anklager hun ham for at have voldtaget hende. Og det kan Sophie naturligvis ikke tro, og det er der ikke ret mange, der kan tro, og der er han også meget gode venner med premierministeren. Men der er sådan en ung anklager, Kate, som, nu kan jeg ikke huske, hvad hun hedder til efter ham, det er også lige meget. Men i hvert fald, hun går på sagen, hun vil have ham dømt. I just made a quick, yeah. So you were saying that the main theme here, we are out of the kitchen. It's not domestic noir.
No, I don't think
it's
so.
more than that. Can you please say again, what do you think is the main theme for you? Yeah.
Well, I suppose it's really consent. It's power, privilege, and consent, and different perceptions of truth. But power in the abuse of power, and I've explored that not just in the way that politicians abuse their power, but in a very visceral, physical way, with this relationship that had been a consensual relationship. I deliberately wanted to write a grey case, a case that was hard to analyse. So it's a relationship that has been consensual. For 5 months they've been involved, and then something happens. And the question at the heart of this novel is, is this risky sex, as he would say, in a public place that both of them have wanted, or is it an abuse of power? Has he done something she hasn't wanted to do? And I suppose I saw that as a metaphor for a bigger abuse of power by the entitled men in this book.
Yeah, because you have one thing is the case. Did he or did he not rape Olivia, his assistant? Did she say yes? Did she say no? But another thing is, how come he thinks he can get away with it in a way? Because that's what you're saying, that it's not just a case of two people, did she say yes or no. It's also a case about abuse of power, and that's why your past in Oxford also is important, because the male entitlement, especially in Britain, is very obvious, that you have this upper class, and they start grooming them. No, what do you say? I don't know, I'm not that good at English, but they start training this upper class very early. And one of the things that we are introduced to in this novel, which is really, really interesting, is this, what you call it, the libertines?
Yeah, so when I was writing this novel, our Prime Minister and David Cameron and our Chancellor of the Exchequer, George Osborne, and our former Foreign Minister, Boris Johnson, they'd all had public school. 2 of them had been at Eton. They'd all been at Oxford. And they'd all been members of this drinking society called the Bullingdon Club, which is our society is quite intrigued by them. These are very, very, very rich elites men who've had this very upper class upbringing, and then when they're at Oxford they dress up in these really ornate clothes, and they are permitted to go and trash restaurants and behave really thuggishly, but because they are rich they just pay for the damage and they get away with it. And this served for me as such a metaphor of the behaviour of this political class. And as I was writing this, I started writing it in January 2016 and I finished it in September 2016. So that was the run-up to and the immediate aftermath of the EU referendum. And I voted Remain, and I'm appalled at what my government's doing at the moment. But I think my anger at the cavalier approach in which the Prime Minister had called this referendum, which he was convinced he would win, and he didn't need to do much to persuade the country because he was sure. He had this kind of essay crisis approach. He was sure he was going to win it. I think my anger at that fueled the scenes in which these boys in my drinking club, which I've called the Libertines after the Earl of Rochester, who was called the Libertine in the 17th century. It's a very thinly veiled Bullingdon club, and I think my anger at their behaviour spilled into my description of those scenes. So yes, I was trying to explore the psychology of this very powerful elite and why they think they can behave like that. Because nobody of any other class would be able to behave like that. They would be arrested, you know, they would be in severe trouble.
Do they have like certain rituals, or is it just like crashing everything and paying for it afterwards? Or
well, I think David Cameron put a piece of his anatomy in a pig's head.
A piece of
his anatomy in a pig's head, mouth.
David Cameron?
Yes.
Okay, well,
so,
that's kind of a ritual.
That's an initiation ceremony. There's no photographs, but this is kind of a rumour that came out at about the same time. I didn't put that in the book.
No,
I thought no one would believe it. They would say that's too fictitious.
But still,
I might get sued as well.
Yeah. And now it's like I think for us Danes, we are aware that that Britain is or England is a very class divided society. But we also have stories in Denmark about high school students from rich cities or rich areas who go out and they crash everything and daddy pays the bill. And so some places in Europe, they're like scared if they know now they're having a study group from one of these rich areas. Yeah, because they can do the same thing. There are stories about dads just paying the hotel. Just buying the hotel because he had to, because they crashed everything. So it's not, but we don't hear very much about that. But again, it's very, when you write about it, it gets very obvious how this is not just something that happens. It has some consequences later on. It's kind of...
in my novel.
Yeah, in your novel, and also in the society here, yeah.
Yeah, I think in my novel there is a secret. There are two bad things that happen in Oxford, aren't there? And we discover one of them quite late on, but it explains why my Tom, his best friend is, not Tom, sorry, James, his best friend is the Prime Minister, who's called Tom Southern, and they've been best friends since Eton. And I was quite interested actually in how James has been at public school, he's been at boarding school, you know, since he's been very little, 7, and often the closest relationships that those men have are with the boys they've been at boarding school with through their adolescence. And so he actually has in a way, he thinks he's being noble, but he has this really strong tie of loyalty to Tom, which is misguided. But but you can see he's not completely flawed when he's a student. You know, he's not completely he's not evil in any way. He's got some redeeming features.
He's a nice guy.
No, he's not a nice guy at all. but it was interesting. You referred to him as a serial rapist who doesn't know he is one. Which apparently I said in an interview, which I can't remember at all.
Yes, you did.
Anyway, it's a very good line. The problem with James is that he has been brought up to believe that his viewpoint of the world is the only one that matters, and he's got 2 older sisters who adore him and a mother who's let him cheat at Cluedo and Monopoly. You know, he's always got away with everything. He's physically beautiful. He's 6'3", a rower. You know, every girl falls for him, and he's intellectually bright as well. So the world is his for the taking. I remember watching boys like that, you know, who are blues. There's a boat race this afternoon in England. If you watch it on the television, there are these Greek gods of men, and I remember watching them, you know, strut across quads, and they wouldn't even acknowledge me, you know. So he's that type of character, and everything has been easy for him, and so he has begun to believe his own PR in a way. He has never had a reason to believe that a woman wouldn't want to have sex with him, except that I think deep down, he says, a really crucial bit in the book, he says, I told the truth, or the truth as I saw it at the time. And I think that's really interesting, because I think we all tell ourselves things we believe at the time. Because I was a political correspondent, I witnessed politicians. I worked in the lobby when Tony Blair was taking us to war in Iraq and in the aftermath of that. And I, for instance, believed that Blair genuinely believed it was justifiable to go to war with Iraq. He believed it so strongly that was his truth, irrespective of whether there was a different truth. And I think politicians often do that. I think they're doing it with Brexit as well. And that was what I was trying to explore, but in a sexual sense with James.
Yeah, because you start with thing, the interpersonal thing, relationship, but actually it takes the consequences are much further. You talked about the Brexit consequences. Yes, that maybe if these men, this Cameron and his men, had just not been so self-sure, they would have been able to convince.
They would have taken more time to. They hadn't even done, financial considerations of the economic impact. I mean, now we're discovering there was no planning done for it, really. Yeah, and I think that's because. It's a bit of a tangent talking about Brexit, but I think it's actually an illustration.
Very interesting.
They didn't consider that they wouldn't win the vote because he'd always won everything. So, I mean, David Cameron is not James, I should say, if there are any lawyers. But I knew him when I was a political correspondent, and certainly a big influence on this book was watching politicians standing up in the chamber and having that confidence to put their narrative across and to know that their narrative was the important one. And for me, I think probably as a woman and as somebody who doubts herself quite a lot and has a lot of imposter syndrome, that was so anathema to me, that was so other to me that I was fascinated where that came from. So
the imposter syndrome?
Imposter syndrome is thinking you're a fraud. Like, I said yesterday that when I sit here, I'm actually putting on an act in a way. I mean, this isn't how I normally dress. I'm normally in my dog walking jeans and my trainers, and I've got my kids, and I'm like banging in front of a computer. So I am presenting myself as an author and crime novelist, aren't I? I'm wearing black. And in the same way, the characters here, the barrister, we were going to talk about that. When she puts on her wig and her gown, she's presenting herself in a certain way. This book's very interested in disguises. It starts with Kate taking off her wig, taking off her gown, shedding her disguise. And the book's interested in unlayering those disguises, I suppose, peeling back the disguises.
Yeah. Peeling back the disguises. That's a good line as well. Yeah.
Someone might read it at me again.
Yeah. We have what did you say? 1 minute or
4 minutes.
Three. Okay. You were talking about, because you are, and it's obvious in this book that you're a writer, but you're also a journalist, and we haven't talked very much about Kate.
Oh yes. No. But so Kate is at the heart of my novel. She's this barrister, and she's the first person I've ever written in the first person. And I loved it. And we talked about domestic noir, and I didn't set out to write a crime novel, but I knew that I wanted to create a character that I hadn't read about. So I wanted a character who appeared very together and very impressive, and would be the sort of character that I would like as a friend and I'd sort of look up to as well. So when I was a news reporter covering lots of crime cases, I would be really intrigued by these barristers in court because they would seem so confident, a bit like these politicians.
When they take the wigs on.
Yeah, but in court they've got this. In England, you wear a wig that's worth £600. You put a big gown on. If you're a woman, you have to tie your hair back so there's nothing obscuring your face. So you're kind of you've put on a uniform like you would as a policeman or something, But you're also very confident. Your job is to persuade the jury that the man in the dock is guilty or that the man in the dock is innocent. And so your narrative is persuasive and it's important and it's powerful. And again, watching as a journalist, I think, how can they be so confident that their truth is the important truth? Because the whole point of a case is about which he said, she said, which truth is the right truth.
Yeah.
So I wanted to create a character like that, but one who was flawed and damaged underneath. And there is so much of me in Kate. There's far more of me in Kate than anybody else. And obviously she has been damaged by something in her past. But she's a very... she's problematic. She's an unreliable narrator, but she is morally pure, I think. She's driven by a sense of moral justice. And although barristers are meant to just accept any case that comes along, she has specialised in prosecuting sexual crimes. And she has a very strong sense of values that she wants to support the young girl who was attacked on her way home, or the boy who was molested at by his scoutmaster, and that's what drives her. And to create her, although I'd covered lots of court cases, I hadn't covered a rape trial. So I went to the Bailey and I watched
The Old Bailey?
The Old Bailey. And I rang up the listings office and said, have you got any sexual offences cases? And completely luckily, I watched a female barrister prosecuting a city slicker who would get his employees, his young women who work with him, his secretaries, he'd give them vodka and cocaine on a Friday night, and then he'd molest them. And then I contacted through the Bar Council. I said, have you got a female barrister in her early 40s who prosecutes sexual offences? And they put me in touch with the very same barrister because she is the top of the tree. And I shadowed her in a rape trial. And then she was fantastic. She read my copy, my scenes like that, to the extent that barrister colleagues were emailing her afterwards and saying, did you write the cross-examination scenes? And I've had messages on Twitter from barristers who have said, I can't see you in the bar directory, but are you a barrister? So that is the best compliment. So I pretended to be a barrister, which was great fun.
Yeah. Okay. You have a new novel.
Another one? Well, yes, I've got. It's taken me a bit longer to write, but it's going to copy edits on Tuesday. All I've got to do at the airport is put the dates on the titles. So I'm very relieved. This book took me 9 months to write, and this one's taken me 2 years.
Oh, okay.
But it's about.
Are you continuing the crime novel?
It is crime.
Yeah. Okay.
Instead of having a barrister, I've got a paediatrician as the main character, and it's about motherhood and maternal madness.
Okay. Great.
Fun enough. Sorry, overrunning.
No, it's fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Og der bliver mulighed for at få signeret bogen herovre i Bog og Idés stand om få minutter.